There are some weird games out there. From concept to presentation, they tread the line between the creative and the bizarre. Sometimes this can pay off, but other times it leads to titles that are more impressive on paper than they are to play. Happily, the Ooze, underneath all of the goofiness, ended up being a pretty fun game after all. The concept for the game definitely draws on popular culture from the 80s and 90s, ranging from Captain Planet to Toxic Crusaders. You play as the scientist who is the victim of a cold, cruel corporation that you are working for. After being transformed into a puddle of sentient green goop as the result of a failed attempt on your life, you must use your newfound abilities to get revenge on your former corporate overlords and hopefully regain your human form in the process. The second you start, the game's key gimmick is revealed. As you move through the environments, your puddle morphs and shifts to fit within the space allocated to it. If you are squeezing through a narrow path, your puddle will press up against the walls, whereas if you're in an open area, it will spread freely out to each side. You can also grapple using certain objects, pulling yourself and the rest of your puddle quickly from one spot to another to avoid obstacles. Your puddle gets bigger as you collect more slime by killing enemies and finding power-ups. You're able to attack enemies by extending your puddle in a strike or by spitting gobs of goo at them. This all looks fairly cool while you're playing the game. Your puddle adapts to the environment as you move about it in a convincing way, whilst the cartoonish head in the centre of the puddle periodically surfaces with some fantastic facial animations. The game takes place from an overhead perspective, and all of the backgrounds and enemies are drawn in an exaggerated, cartoonish manner. It definitely has all the trappings of American cartoons of the era, which makes sense since the game was developed by Sega Technical Institute. Much like those cartoons, it certainly won't be to everyone's taste, but if you enjoyed those, then you'll probably find a lot to like here. Another distinctive aspect of the game is the music. It was composed by Howard Drossen, who also worked on other Sega titles, particularly Comic Zone. There is definitely shared DNA here. The Ooze has particularly dark-sounding music, underpinned by some of the grimiest electronic bass on the Mega Drive. Like the graphics, the music will not appeal to everyone, but it certainly evokes the same character as the rest of the game. The rest of the sound effects are mostly fairly nondescript, save the occasional voice sample. The game's biggest problem is its difficulty. Some of the challenge comes from tricky level design and creative use of the puddle mechanic. This is really cool, leading to some situations that are hugely satisfying to overcome. The flip side comes from when the game feels overly tough for no reason, where the somewhat clunky controls and hidden environmental dangers become more frustrating than enjoyable. It sometimes feels like the game forces you into unavoidable situations to ensure you're almost never able to build up your puddle to critical mass. Enemies sometimes appear out of nowhere, whilst the overhead view occasionally obscures important elements. If you can get past these irritations, then you might be the exact person that the Ooze was created for. It almost feels like a lost Amiga game more than a Mega Drive title. It does make me wish for a spiritual successor using modern technology. Imagine the Ooze remade as a 90s themed comedy horror game in a new 3D engine with exaggerated physics in a fully reactive environment. Damn. Until then, the original 2D version will just have to do.